Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the AfrikanExodus show. Particularly, welcome to the Black Child Advocacy Network segment. If you don't know, this segment is really dedicated to educating the masses of African people on the systemic racism that we face, whether you are in Babylon, USA, Babylon, Europe, whether you are based in the continent of Africa, and how different systems and different entities are working for the oppression of the African family. I do want to remind you all, if you are interested, I do have a Patreon group that I started for this segment called the Black Child Advocacy Network. The link to that is down below. There are different resources that are available to you if you join that group. And as well, you can also look into individual consultations as an option for one of the options for Patreon. So with that, I want to talk about the population boom, the threat that the elites see from a growing African family. This is something that many people have taken note of. I've taken note of it a number of times on this channel, particularly with the narratives of people like Bill Gates, of people like the royal families, the British royal families, Prince William and Prince Charles, echoing these population control narratives. So before we even get started with this segment, I want to start off with this video right here for those who might not have seen or known about this occurrence that happened, I believe, about a year ago.
A monument considered by some conservative Christians to be satanic was badly damaged by an explosive device. One of the 4 granite panels on the Georgia Guidestones monument was reduced to rubble. The attraction was built in 1980 from local granite and commissioned under the name R.C. Christian. The 19-foot-high panels bear a 10-part message in 8 languages with guidance for living an age of reason. The so-called American Stonehenge also serves as a sundial and astronomical calendar. The bombing is under investigation.
This is the Georgia Guidestones. Many of you might have heard of this monument that has been in existence for longer than I've been alive. This monument exploded last year, with many people kind of brushing past the story, many people acting like it's an inconsequential occurrence. But if you look at the time that this monument exploded, the timing was basically towards the end of what we would say was the pandemic, meaning this monument, in my opinion, fulfilled its purpose at the time where it was detonated. So you saw in the video, it wasn't completely destroyed even by whoever it was that detonated explosions near the monument. It wasn't completely destroyed, but the state decided to knock it down basically and not rebuild it, even though most of the stones were still standing. I want to note, to date, even though they had security cameras, even though this is a well-known landmark that you would think would have some people who would look and know what's going on in that area, or some type of park official, someone, despite all of this, they have never found the person who detonated that explosion near the Guidestones. The story just went away. This person, who you could say committed maybe something that someone would say is a terrorist offense, exploding things or even arson or something of that nature, they've never found this person. So this person comes in the middle of the night, they detonate explosions that are going to destroy this well-known worldwide monument, and no one seems to care anymore. Like I said, I believe that the monument was destroyed because it fulfilled its purpose for the season for which it was created for, because I believe that we are in this new order of ages that the monument was built for. And as you've seen in the video, they said it was built by someone who called themselves R.C. Christian. It's widely believed that the Rosicrucians are the ones who put up this monument, who funded it. And that is very significant, because if you know about the Rosicrucians, you know, we can get to deeper studies about them, but they are one of the main Illuminati bodies that exist inside of this world. So that's a deep rabbit hole. We're not going to get into that today. I want to focus, though, on what the monument stands for, particularly this one area of the monument. What does it tell us about the plans of the New World Order. So you see it says maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. Maintain humanity under 500 million people in perpetual balance with nature. Now, if you don't know, and we can look it up just so I can have today's figures as far as how many people exist in the world today, just so we have an exact amount. Okay, so according to the World Population Clock, 8 billion people exist in the world today. Here's the births, deaths, today's population growth, but the overall amount right here. Current world population, over 8 billion people. So there's a problem for whoever created this monument, because as it says, we have to keep the world, according to them, under 500 million people to keep it in perpetual balance with nature. So clearly, whoever made this monument must have seen by now that we are not at 500 million people. And yet the question is, this organization that is still in existence, the Rosicrucians, this movement to control the population, is still in existence today. You'll see it inside of a number of bodies, international bodies. We're going to talk about one international body, the WEF, in a little. So this agenda is still in existence. And yet at the time where they decided to detonate this monument, they felt like things were set in place to a degree where they can now destroy the evidence so that people will not be easily able to trace where these agendas came from. So with that, let's go to a number of articles we're going to talk about on this segment. Let's start with population growth. And I want to emphasize the reason why this is the subject for today is because this is a message that we are bombarded by constantly as African people. I want to show you a number of things in society you might not have realized you were being targeted at with this message of population control. So this is an article from the BBC, Population Growth. 5 things you need to know before you have kids. And of course, the question is, why are people so invested in telling you what you need to know and what you need to do in order to have children? Shouldn't you and your husband, your wife, whoever, be able to come to that decision without some separate individual making judgments and pronouncements on your personal choices? Shouldn't that be something that's out of the public domain, you would think, right? But that's not how it's treated. It's treated as something that is a public cost-benefit analysis problem. They have to look at your population, they have to look at your personal decisions and see how it affects the society, which is obviously problematic for a number of reasons. So let's go through some of the reasons that they identify that you should basically think about, things that you should think about before you have children. So we're going to start with this 2017 study. Having one fewer child could save 58 tons a year of CO2 equivalent emissions. So someone wants you to think before you have a child about your impact on CO2 emissions. This is compared to just 2.4 tons saved from living car-free for a year, or 1.6 tons by avoiding one transatlantic round-trip flight. Just simply don't have a child. You'll save so much more to help CO2 emissions. This is asinine to think that people would even put this out there, not telling people who are rich, the people who have jets, the people who are flying around like Bill Gates, the people who talk about CO2 emissions, yet they're flying around in these private jets, not telling them, hey, maybe you should cut down on what you're doing, take a public public transportation just like everyone else. No, target people who are having children and make them feel bad, or like they are responsible for CO2 emissions. You're going to see as time goes on that this CO2 thing is going to, carbon emissions thing, it's going to manifest in a number of narratives. It's already being used as a way to cramp down on different societal choices in order to reorganize society. Believe it or not, they're reorganizing society based on this. Even though I've really just seen an article very recently saying that CO2 emissions have decreased, but yet, this is what's being used as emergency powers that are going to give not just the state but the international system the ability to regulate you and your family. Let's go to the next one. The UN predicts that the world's population is expected to continue growing to about 10 billion people by 2050. And for context, this article, let's see, I don't see the date on it, but I believe this was pre-pandemic, I believe. So most of the growth in population in the last 30 years is expected to come from Africa. But the average American, for example, currently has a much higher carbon footprint. Think about what they're saying right here. Most of the population in the world is coming from Africa, but the average American has a much higher carbon footprint. So clearly, the population growing in Africa or not growing in Africa is not going to be the thing that's going to push us over as far as carbon emissions. Yet why are people like Bill Gates using the population growth in Africa as the reason why the earth is going to be destroyed? We're going to read a little bit from him in a little bit to just talk about his reasoning for why everyone should be intervening inside of the African continent. Now, although the human population is growing, the rate of growth has been slowing, and the average birth rate across the world is actually falling. We're going to go into that in a second because it's only been exacerbated from what was a slow population decline to a quick population decline following the COVID-19 pandemic. And then female education and access to contraception are two interventions that have been shown to bring the birth rate down. And that brings up the answer to a question you might have been wondering. Why are people like Bill Gates, why are people like Prince William, why are they so invested in pushing things like contraception in Africa? Because they're trying to accomplish their agenda. They won't come out and say what their agenda is. You can probably research those families. You could do research certainly on Bill Gates' family and figure out why he is if of all people, the founder of Microsoft would be the ones who go so hard pushing these agendas. But you see why they're pushing for contraception. This is an overt way. There are subvert ways you can enforce population control, but this is an overt way to do it because contraception, the narrative is that this is going to help women and not that this is going to cause health effects to women, which oftentimes is the case, especially with the type of contraception that they push in the African continent. They'll say contraception is something that's going to help society, and that's why we're going to push it. It's something that is going to help women be able to be educated and things like that. So they could do this overtly without having to face public backlash. Now, other things, though, that would not be welcomed, for example, pushing things like jabs, that's something that's probably going to be more subvert depending on who you're talking to and what you're talking to about them. So you could probably tell I'm treading lightly on this subject for a reason. Hopefully you're able to read between the lines, though. Let's go to this next article because, again, we're talking about the population boom. Now, going back, actually, to the Georgia Guidestones. Again, these were detonated last year. Maintain humanity under 500 million. What happened since then? Okay. researchers say Earth is headed for jaw-dropping population decline. It's extraordinary. We'll have to reorganize societies. Emphasize, they have to reorganize societies for this population decline. So let's read through this article. People around the globe are having way fewer babies. By the year 2100, that might turn into a pretty big problem for humanity rather than the relief that one might expect, which is common sense. You can't just say, let's get rid of a population significantly and not expect there to be drawbacks to that. But that's the narrative they've been peddling, as if they can't see the possible consequences. The truth is they don't care about the consequences because they have their own plan as far as how they're going to make it work. But it says if there aren't already dozens of countries, populations will be going into decline in this century. According to a new study published in The Lancet this week, 23 countries are expected to feel this effect, intensify their populations, dropping to half of what they are now by 2100. That's amazing to think that the population supposedly will drop that much by that time. Now, the global population will peak, it says, at 9.7 billion around 2064, according to the new projection, then drop off 8.8 billion towards the end of the century. You should always be asking yourself, where are these projections coming from? Like, how did they know that? How do they even estimate what's going to happen in 2064? I'm going to tell you how they can estimate it. There are hidden spiritualist occult organizations that are letting them know this is what we project to happen by this time. Period. I mean, you might not want to hear that, but that's really the truth. You don't have intel on what's happening in 2064 enough to come out to the public and say it without having some assurity that this is the agenda what will be accomplished. However, let me tell you this. I actually don't even believe that that's their plan, even though they're putting that out there. I believe that they have a more drastic population decline planned. Now, all speculation, but if you look at what they're talking about in the world right now, they're talking about another possible pandemic, another possible decline of the population coming. Understand that they're giving you, they're giving you notice right now that something else is going to happen. Something else is going to come about. If you look at what's happening with the World Health Organization, how they're putting out certain narratives, the WEF, everyone's talking about this anxiety of another pandemic is coming. If you see what's happening, you can see that that's not going to be the end population probably. They have another plan up their sleeves, in my opinion. Now, that's a pretty big thing. Most of the world is transitioning into a natural population decline, said Christopher Murray. It's incredibly hard to think this through and recognize how big a thing this is. It's extraordinary. We'll have to reorganize societies. Isn't that something interesting? So the population declines. You could even say it's probably a momentary decline, right? Because this is a decline after the COVID-19 pandemic, right? Plandemic. And this is the decline that's happening after that. Yet they're saying we have to reorganize all of society. The common sense thing would be to say that, well, if this is happening after a plandemic, whatever, if this is happening just because of that, then surely population is going to recover. Surely we're going to have the same population at some point, right? This is just a momentary hiccup inside of our history. I mean, things are going to go back to normal. So why are you trying to reorganize society based on something that supposedly is over? Most people have the opinion that that pandemic is over. Why are you trying to reorganize society based on something that was in the past? Unless you have plans for something in the future. That's what I would say, at least. The reality is with more women receiving an education, entering the workforce, combined with the wide availability of contraception, fertility rates are dropping, sometimes precipitously around the world, a stark reversal of the baby boom following the Second World War. Countries including Spain, Portugal, Thailand will see their populations more than halved by the end of this century. This is jaw-dropping. But aren't fewer humans better for a ravished world that's rapidly drained of its resources? let me emphasize this right here, because this is the biggest lie that they're trying to get you to believe. The craziness of it is that they are continuously ravaging the planet, ravaging, obviously, number one, Africa, but other places in the global south, ravaging the countries in Latin America, ravaging the countries in Asia, ravaging the entire world that has been colonized by this global behemoth system. They constantly ravage it, and then while they're continuing to ravage it, let's be clear, there are still plethora of minerals and resources that that have still not been uncovered. You know, think about Africa, the vastness of this continent. But even though they have certainly done their deed as far as weakening the continent, don't even believe that the minerals and the resources are depleted. There's still more that is there than what they have taken up until now. But they want you to believe that the world has been so ravaged to the point where there has to be an intervention. It's been so ravaged to the point where nothing's left for the rest of humanity. There's only a few resources left. This is a lie. Land, there's enough land for the population. You know, if you think the Most High would create a system or create a world that could not sustain the population, these are liars. They want you to believe this. Think about how much land is not being inhabited as we speak. How much land is basically, you see these urban areas and people are congested. How much land is freed up and yet owned by these corporations, individuals owning lands that they don't even occupy. Think about that. The farms, the mines occupied by individuals, hundreds of millions of miles of land occupied by individuals. And yet they want you to believe, those same people who are occupying your homeland, occupying the farmlands, occupying this vast territory, whether it's in Africa or other places around the world, these same individuals want to tell you that there's not enough land for everyone. And some of you are buying a narrative because you have been trained to think that qualification by the Babylon system, qualification by this system, means that you believe people without evidence. You believe them without your own reasoning. You believe them without your own insight. That is a lie that they peddle to you. So stop believing this idea that a piece of paper that was given to someone by the same Babylon system is enough for you to believe their narrative without even doing your own research, without even going out and seeing if whether they're saying is true. Have you gone to the countryside to see, is there really not enough land for the population? Have you gone to different countries? Have you talked to people in different places to actually see if what they're saying is true? So let's read some more. Africa will only feel the effects of declining populations much later. This is another, like I said, these people are speaking to you not from their evidence. They're projecting things based on their own insight or their own wickedness, honestly. They said Africa will only feel the effects of declining populations much later, with populations in several African nations ballooning instead of shrinking in population by size by 2100. In fact, the researchers note that Nigeria is projected to become the second most populous country in the world, with 791 million people by 2100. They said, we will have many more people of African descent in more countries as we go through this, noting that the world will have to address challenges around racism as a result. When it says the world will have to address challenges around racism, that is a narrative that comes right from the World Economic System or Forum. They have been tooting this idea that we're going to have a society that is favorable not to all Africans, but to enough that we give this image that we are forward thinking, that we have moved past racism, that we're ready to do right by African people, but certainly not all. Only certain people will be allowed to enter our new system. They'll be able to enter our new world order. Only certain people. But all those people, that's too much. Let's cut down on your population in order to let just some of you through. Some of you will take that, saying, hey, as long as you're letting me and my family in, let's go for it. but the masses of your people you're willing to leave behind and allow for the system to do what they want to do to them, to get rid of them. So that's it for this article. Let's go to another one. So this is the World Economic Forum. If you want to know the plans of the New World Order, a good place to start is the world economic system. Bye, baby. Birth rates are declining globally. Here's why it matters. All right, so this is going to link everything into that pandemic. At the end of May, the Chinese government announced that parents in China would now be permitted to have up to 3 children. This announcement came only 5 years after a stunning reversal of their 1981 child policy. Something is clearly going on, and that's what everyone should be seeing. Something's not right. China, I remember hearing about their one-child policy. I remember hearing about the fact that most people wanted boys, and now there's not enough girls, and now there's orphanages are flooded with girls because people only can have one child, and how this is messing up the ability to reproduce. I remember hearing this, and it was like this horrific thing that people were talking about, but something reversed suddenly. They said that something that China has experienced is a fertility collapse. According to the latest census released in May, China is losing 400,000 people every year. China still claims its population is growing, but even if these projections are taken at face value, the population decline previously projected to start by mid-century may now begin as early as 2030. As early as 2030. If any of you have been paying attention to the world economic system, to different globalist organizations, 2030 is a very significant year. And I want to emphasize to you, 2030, get your stuff together. Get your families protected. Be ready to be organized by 2030, because I don't know everything that's planned. No one does, but clearly this system has some plans for this particular year, because it's always being spoken about in the media. They said this means China could lose 600 to 700 million from its population by 2100. Think about how crazy that is. 600 to 700 million people by 2100. Can you fathom losing that many people in that short of time? Or they said about half of the world of its total population today. China's population changes are not unique among the superpowers. According to the United States' most recent census, the U.S. birth rate has declined for 6 straight years and 19% since 2007. Like China, the U.S. birth rate is now well below replacement rate at 1.6. For a country to naturally replace its population, its birth rate needs to be at least 2.1. You can also add the world's second most populous country, India, to the list of low fertility countries, with a birth rate at replacement rate at 2.1. Also, Japan, Russia, Brazil, Bangladesh, Indonesia. There are still big countries, though, with huge birth rates, such as Pakistan, 3.4, and Nigeria, land of our Igbo people, Yoruba people, 5.1 birth rate. Huge, right? But even these numbers are lower than they were in 1960, when Pakistan was 6.6 and Nigeria 6.4, and it's declining every year. So they're telling you Africa's population boom is still declining, just not at the rate that they wanted to. And this is something important to emphasize, because I don't know if you all remember when the pandemic was in full swing. It had not yet hit Africa, really. It was in the U.S., it was in China, obviously, it was in Europe. But I remember hearing these experts come out and say, hey, Africa, it's coming. Get ready, Africa, get ready, Africa. By the grace of the Most High, it really did not hit Africa the way that it was planned to hit Africa, or the way that it was thought to hit Africa. It just didn't hit the way that they thought it was going to hit Africa. And yet, here we are today, where they are looking at the situation. It's hit other places worse. It's hit the West worse. It's hit China worse. It's hit other places worse, and completely reversed the population. Africa is still standing strong. Don't think that is not something that is motivating future decisions being made as we speak. So this article goes into the specifics, the role of COVID-19 in declining birth rates. Most children these days are wanted or planned children, especially in the developed world. Deciding to have a baby is contingent on being optimistic about the future, and optimism is difficult to muster during a global pandemic. They're saying right here that just the idea that people were in fear, that was enough for people to basically stop having babies, which I believe is true for some people. That was enough for them to say, I don't know if I want to have a child. Okay, so that's one cause that they're attributing to the pandemic. Let's see what else. A decline in fertility is just one way the pandemic is suppressing population growth in many developed nations. The other, closed borders. In 2020, Australia recorded its first population decline since World War I due to stricter COVID-related border controls. But the third grim factor is also at work. The death toll of the disease itself. Researchers predict that life expectancy in the United States has declined by a full year as a result of COVID deaths. Emphasize here, and I'll give you my theory on this. Racial minorities were particularly hard hit, with African American life expectancy suppressed by 2 years and Latino life expectancy by 3 years. Officially, the pandemic is responsible for more than 3 million deaths, but that figure could be far higher since some countries may be underreporting deaths. This is probable, for example, in India, where the pandemic is estimated to claim 4,000 lives a day. Many authorities believe the real count is far higher. And if you understand how big the population of India was before this, you understand how significant this was. For the population of India to go down so significantly, whereas previously India was projected to overtake China at some point. That's very huge. So understand, that was not just supposed to be India, it was supposed to be Africa too, understand. But they said, well, first of all, let's not skirt past this point right here that they said. They didn't give too much facts in this, but they did remark decline in fertility is one way the pandemic is suppressing population in many developed nations. Okay? You have to decide, or you have to search and research, why is there a decline in fertility? I'm not going into the specifics. There's a lot of people, a lot of doctors who have very strong data that would be concerning to you as far as why that's happening. But this part right here, racial minorities were particularly hard hit. Why is that? That's something that I struggled with at first. Why is it that Africans in America were being harder hit than Africans in Africa? And honestly, I mean, we're the same people with the same DNA, and that's not just the case in America. A lot of our people in other places, you see places that were basically quote unquote underdeveloped, or people did better than the places that were developed. I think there's a reason why a lot of people and systems want us to stay inside of the Babylon system, and that's because the way that society is organized, the way that they control our food, our water supply, the way that they control our land situation, our ability to own land, puts us in a position where they can actually control our livelihood and our health. So let's go to this last article before, I believe there's one more article. Actually, okay, we're going to go to this one very quickly, and then I'm going to go to the last article. But the health disparities and deaths. A year examining how racial health disparities harm generations of Black Americans, and found that they were far worse than their white counterparts in multiple health measures ranging from birth to death. Let that resonate with you. From the time you're born in America to the time you die, your birth defects, your health is severely impacted as opposed to other people. We have a high rate of infant mortality, maternal mortality, higher incidence of asthma during childbirth, more difficulty treating mental illness as teens, higher rates of high blood pressure, Alzheimer's disease, and other diseases as adults. More Black babies, we all know, are more likely to die. We're more likely to have asthma, as it says right here. Mental health, we know that we deal with significant mental health from the racist system. If If you want a great analysis, I've talked about this book a number of times, but the book Black on Black Violence by Dr. Amos Wilson, beautiful description of not just the mental health, but how the mental health has affected us who commit intra-racial violence, basically violence against your brothers and sisters. Very good book right there. High blood pressure. I mean, you don't even have to listen to all the statistics. We've all heard them over time. I've heard it over time. I've heard how black women are dying in delivery rooms. I've heard how our people are dying in numerous ways from pollutants and so many things that we are affected by when we're living in their system. And don't get me wrong, they're doing stuff everywhere. They're doing stuff in Africa too. But their ability to kind of have us all in one space and cramp down on us from these isolated ghettos, their ability is significantly depleted. So that's just something to think about. But let's go to the end of this, the last article, the African youth boom, what's worrying Bill Gates. This is, again, pre-pandemic. So this is September 2018. What worries Bill Gates the most? The booming population of Africa looms over his foundation's latest global survey. By the way, Bill Gates has become so disliked. I don't think they would have put this article out today. Understand he might not be popular today, but his foundation is still in place. His foundation is still doing a number of things. So don't get distracted by the fact that they stopped talking about him in a positive light and think that he went away. He didn't go away. Him and the others he's been working with are still working hard on their globalist agenda. It says by the end of this century, there will be 4 billion more people on Earth. 3 billion of these extra souls will be born in Africa. These extra souls will be born in Africa. I mean, clearly we can see this woman is not who wrote this article. She's of the African people. And she's speaking of 3 billion people who Yah created and put on Earth as if they're just extra. That is just so explicitly racist. The challenge, he says, is that Africa must almost quadruple its agricultural productivity to feed itself. That's very daunting. And why can't Africa feed itself? Because the people are not having access to the lands. But Bill Gates isn't advocating that. He's not advocating access for our people to the lands that are being owned by these corporations. No, he's advocating instead something else. So half of the Bill Gates and Melinda Gates Foundation spending goes to Africa. The funds put into the foundation by themselves and fellow philanthropist Warren Buffett now amount to more than $50 billion. Until last year, Gates, the Microsoft founder, was the world's richest man. He has now been overtaken by Jeff Bezos. He said, it says, ignore Africa at your peril. That's what Big Gates said. Ignore Africa at your peril. Again, he's telling the world, if you ignore Africa, you're going to pay for it. If you wonder why they don't leave us alone, that's why. He says the stability of Africa makes a huge difference to the entire world. Here comes the threats. A pandemic like Ebola can spread very fast. He warns, and many others spread even faster if there are no local health services to contain them. Migration is the other threat to Europe's politics. Syria was a small country, he reminds us, yet its civil war exodus has challenged the asylum system. So I want to emphasize this part, but let's finish this actually. Watch out, because Africa is another order of magnitude. The huge African youth boom is a strong theme in the report. We're in a world of aging and shrinking populations. Africa's demographic bulge could be an asset or a threat. So it would be wise to make their lives attractive. Oh my gosh. Not just out of pure human caring. Invest in Africa's youth, their human capital, health and education. Support their productive agriculture. Protect subsistence farmers against climate change, and see how self-interest blends with good works. Self-interest blends with good works. That's what these people live by. That's the mantra they live by. So the population, the migration issue, that's, again, something that was alluded to by the World Economic Forum. This is something that they're trying to plan for. Only certain people will be allowed to integrate into society. The others basically are in need of being done away with. They're extra souls. So that's the plan that they have for us. You see how the sub-Saharan population could hit 4 billion by the end of the century unless girls become more educated and empowered. Don't get me wrong, like, I believe in education, but when they're trying to use education as a way to curb our population, how does that make you feel when they're saying that, oh, your population could hit 4 billion, but if we make sure your daughter goes to school and is educated and quote unquote empowered, how does that make you feel? That has to make you wonder, what education are you talking about? I promise you, they're not talking about homeschool education. They're not talking about education for the community, by the community. They're talking about education in their system, their education system, their control system, their assimilation system, their programming system. So these are just a few things I wanted to talk about, honestly. Bill Gates, someone who I'm sure we'll have to come back to again. Back to the purpose of this broadcast, though. I mean, I want to go to this image one more time to remind you all that the agenda has been put out there. And it's not in effect yet for what they want it to be. We are the ones that are in the way of them basically being able to create their utopia. If you think about it, Africa is the one holdout space. Africa is the holdout space where the population has not declined. So we are the ones in the way of their utopia. It's very clear. So I hope this gave you all some food for thought. This is a different type of segment I would usually do for this, different type of show I would do for this segment. Something I just wanted to talk about. I don't know if we're doing it next week, but I have a book that really goes into detail on the issue of the contraception being pushed into the continent and the population control. If I can find it, because I'm still unpacking my things, if I can find it, I think we might go through that next week. If not, then certainly we'll go through another subject. I'm also looking to possibly talk about the Multicultural Placement Act. That is something that is used by the child welfare system to sever, this child welfare system in America to sever black parents and their children from being able to, or black foster parents even, from being able to foster children. It's something that severs children from the community, so it's just another way that the state tries to control us. So I might do that as the next segment, but we shall see. But with that, I hope that was helpful. Definitely share your opinions, your thoughts, offer any resources that you can inside of the comments and the chat. Again, you can join the Patreon group to have access to resources, and all these articles will be available on the Patreon group. So I thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next video.